What if the deepest kind of love is not the one that appears effortlessly, but the one that finds its way back after distance, silence, and time? Some connections seem to exist long before two people ever meet. It is as though an unseen force quietly ties certain souls together across years, choices, pain, and separation. No matter how far they wander, or how much life tries to pull them apart, something keeps guiding them back toward each other. There is a pull beyond logic, beyond circumstance, beyond anything the mind can fully explain. And maybe that is because some bonds are not created by chance. Maybe they are discovered. Welcome to Soul Meets Shadow, where we explore the hidden dimensions of the human soul and the mysteries of love through the lens of depth psychology. In this journey, we will uncover how the ideas of Carl Jung help explain why certain relationships feel eternal, transformative, and impossible to forget. This is not just about romance in the ordinary sense. It is about symbolic connection, psychological awakening, and the profound inner transformation that happens when two souls truly recognize one another. If you believe some people are destined to return to each other no matter how much time passes, then you already understand something powerful. What is genuine always finds its path again. According to Jungian psychology, soul connections go far beyond attraction or compatibility. They emerge from the deepest layers of the unconscious mind. When two people feel an immediate and unexplainable recognition, something archetypal is being activated within them. Jung described archetypes as ancient patterns that live within the collective unconscious, inherited images and energies shared by all humanity. Among the most important are the anima and animus, the inner feminine energy within men and the inner masculine energy within women. When a person encounters someone who awakens these hidden aspects, the experience can feel overwhelming, sacred, and deeply familiar. This recognition reaches far beyond the ego. It touches the self, which Jung described as the true center of the psyche, the deeper totality of who we really are. That is why certain people affect us so intensely. They do not simply enter our lives, they awaken forgotten parts of our identity. But this type of connection is rarely simple. In fact, the stronger the bond, the more deeply it exposes what has been hidden within us. Jung called this hidden dimension the shadow, the collection of fears, wounds, insecurities, desires, and rejected emotions we push out of conscious awareness. When two souls meet in an authentic way, they become mirrors for each other. They reflect not only beauty and love, but also pain, fear, and unresolved parts of the self. And this is why these relationships can feel both magical and terrifying at the same time. The purpose of such a connection is not merely comfort or emotional escape. It exists to transform both people involved. These encounters challenge the masks we wear. They force us to confront truths we have avoided. They bring buried emotions to the surface so healing can finally begin. In Jungian thought, this process is called individuation, the lifelong journey of integrating all aspects of the self and becoming psychologically whole. The reunion of destined souls often acts as a catalyst for that process. It shakes the foundation of ordinary life and awakens something ancient within the psyche. Many people describe these encounters as feeling strangely familiar, as if they have known the other person forever, even when they have just met. Jung believed this feeling comes from the collective unconscious, where the soul recognizes symbolic patterns beyond ordinary time and memory. When this happens, the connection feels larger than logic. The other person becomes more than a partner. They become a mirror reflecting hidden potential, forgotten wounds, and unrealized parts of the self. The attraction can feel irresistible because the soul senses an opportunity for profound inner growth. At first, this awakening often feels beautiful and intoxicating. The world around them seems to fade as their inner world becomes more alive, but soon deeper emotions begin surfacing. Old fears appear, Emotional defenses rise, questions emerge that cannot be ignored. This is why these connections frequently trigger emotional crises, confusion, or periods of separation. It is not because the bond lacks depth, it is because the bond carries too much depth to leave either person unchanged. The ego naturally resists transformation because transformation demands surrender. It asks us to release old identities, outdated beliefs, and protective illusions. That is why soul connections often create tension between who we have been and who we are becoming. The relationship becomes a psychological crossroads where the soul demands honesty. These destined encounters are not random romances passing through life without purpose. They are symbolic invitations into growth. The other person forces us inward. Through them, we are confronted with the hidden parts of ourselves we have spent years avoiding. Their presence exposes emotional wounds that only genuine intimacy could reveal. Yet, at the same time, they often see us with a depth and clarity we have never experienced before. This is what makes these relationships unforgettable. They touch something essential, and even when separation happens, the impact rarely disappears. Distance may silence communication, but it does not erase transformation. In many cases, time apart deepens the inner process even more. The soul continues working beneath the surface, pushing both people toward greater awareness. What felt like loss may actually become part of the awakening itself. That is why the truest soul connections are not defined only by how they begin, but by what they awaken, what they heal, and whether they find the courage to return transformed. Some loves are meant to teach, others are meant to change the direction of your entire life, and the rarest ones do both. In the end, Jung reminds us that love is not simply about finding someone who completes us, it is about encountering someone who reveals us to ourselves, someone who becomes part mirror, part teacher, part destiny. Through them, we come face to face with the deepest truth of our own soul. And perhaps that is why certain people never fully leave us, because once a connection reaches the level of the soul, it becomes woven into who we are becoming. What makes these soul connections so powerful is the strange sense of recognition they create. It feels less like meeting someone new and more like remembering someone your spirit has always known. A bond like this brings an emotional openness that is almost impossible to explain. Around this person, the walls begin to fall naturally. Pretending becomes exhausting. Masks stop making sense. There is a feeling of being emotionally exposed in the purest way, as if another soul can suddenly see through every layer you spent years building to protect yourself. Few relationships ever reach that depth. What is fascinating is that these encounters often arrive at the exact moment the soul is prepared for them, even when the conscious mind feels completely unready. According to Carl Jung, the self quietly guides us toward the experiences necessary for our inner evolution. In that sense, a destined soul does not enter our life randomly. The meeting itself becomes part of a larger psychological unfolding. The soul recognizes something in the other that reflects its own hidden truth. And when that recognition happens, it carries a certainty that words cannot fully contain. It is not logic. It is not fantasy, it is a deep internal knowing. Even when the relationship becomes difficult, something about it refuses to disappear completely. That is because the connection is not rooted in temporary desire or surface attraction. It is tied to something symbolic, something connected to wholeness itself. Jung often described individuation as a journey through the dark forest of the psyche in search of inner light. Walking that path beside someone who mirrors your deepest self can feel both comforting and terrifying. The mirror does not only reveal beauty, it also reveals everything hidden beneath the surface, the unresolved fears, insecurities, and emotional wounds waiting to be faced. And that may be the greatest gift of these encounters. By recognizing something sacred in another person, we begin reconnecting with the sacred part of ourselves we had forgotten. Whether the relationship survives, every challenge life brings cannot always be known, but one thing becomes undeniable. After experiencing a bond like this, neither person remains the same. A true soul connection changes the structure of the inner world. It returns us to the center of who we are. When two destined souls meet, the emotional intensity can feel overwhelming. Yet what many people fail to understand is that these connections are not built only on harmony and romance. They are also spaces where the unconscious becomes highly active. Jung believed that love is one of the strongest vehicles for projection. We unconsciously place hidden desires, fears, hopes, wounds, and fantasies onto the people who affect us most deeply. In soulmate relationships, this process becomes even more intense because the connection activates layers of the psyche that are usually dormant. We begin seeing the other person not only as they truly are, but also as the symbolic answer to everything we long for. We project ideals of healing, safety, fulfillment, and unconditional love onto them, too. At the same time, our deepest fears also surface: abandonment, jealousy, insecurity, control, anger, and emotional pain. At first, these projections can create the feeling of a perfect union. It seems as if the missing piece of the soul has finally appeared. But eventually, reality begins breaking through the illusion. The other person starts revealing their imperfections, limitations, and humanity. And in that moment, something important happens. The fantasy begins dissolving so real love can emerge. This is where the shadow enters the relationship. Jung described the shadow as the hidden side of the personality, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or avoid acknowledging. In deep relationships, the shadow rises to the surface through emotional triggers and conflicts. The jealousy we feel, the fear of being left, the need for control, the anger we cannot explain, these emotions often reveal wounds that existed long before the relationship itself. The soul connection forces us inward. Instead of endlessly blaming the other person, we are invited to ask deeper questions. Why does this fear affect me so strongly? What wound is this relationship exposing inside me? What part of myself still needs healing? This is why these relationships can become transformative rather than destructive. Conflict itself is not proof that love has failed. Sometimes conflict is the doorway to greater consciousness. Real love is not built through avoiding pain. It is built through the willingness to face pain honestly together. Two destined souls are not meant to run from every shadow that appears between them. They are meant to recognize that healing requires awareness, accountability, and emotional courage. The relationship becomes a space where both people slowly learn to integrate the fragmented parts of themselves instead of projecting them outward. This process demands maturity because it requires us to stop treating the other person as the source of all our suffering. Instead, we begin seeing how the relationship mirrors our inner world. The fear of abandonment may reveal childhood wounds. The need for perfection may expose unrealistic expectations around love. The jealousy may point toward insecurity and self-worth struggles that were never fully healed. When these realizations are faced honestly, love begins evolving. It stops being based only on emotional dependency or fantasy and becomes a path of mutual growth. A destined soul is not simply someone who makes life feel magical. They are someone who calls you into deeper truth. There are relationships that exist only to distract us from ourselves. Then there are relationships that awaken us completely. Soul connections belong to the second category. They shake us out of illusion. They force us to confront not only love, but also fear, shame, longing, anger, vulnerability, and need. Everything hidden beneath the surface rises into awareness, and this is what makes the connection sacred. Accepting the shadow in another person means accepting the humanity of love itself. It means understanding that real soul unions are not about perfection. They are about presence, healing, honesty, and transformation. These connections do not erase wounds overnight. Instead, they create the possibility of healing those wounds consciously through intimacy and awareness. That is why these bonds often feel inseparable, even through periods of darkness. The souls are not choosing each other only in moments of joy and light. They are also recognizing each other through pain, confusion, and emotional depth. The love between destined souls awakens something ancient inside the human psyche. Jung believed the collective unconscious carries universal archetypes that shape our deepest emotional experiences. Among them, one of the most powerful is the archetype of eternal love, the timeless story of two souls bound together across suffering, separation, and time itself. This archetype appears throughout mythology, literature, and spiritual traditions across history. From ancient legends to tragic romances, humanity has always told stories about love that survives every obstacle because its roots exist beyond ordinary life. When two people feel an unexplainable sense that they belong to each other, that feeling is not merely emotional, it is symbolic. It touches something ancient within the soul, something older than logic, older than fear, and perhaps even older than memory itself. What if the deepest love is not the one that appears quickly, but the one that returns no matter how far life seems to pull two people apart? Some connections feel older than this lifetime, as if they were written into the soul long before two people ever met. There are bonds that move beyond logic, beyond ordinary attraction, beyond simple coincidence. They carry a strange sense of recognition, a feeling that two souls already know each other somewhere beneath memory and time. According to Carl Jung, these powerful connections are not random. They emerge from the deepest layers of the unconscious and awaken parts of us that everyday life often keeps hidden. This is the journey we explore here on Soul Meets Shadow, where love is seen not only as romance, but as transformation, awakening, and the search for wholeness. Jung believed that when two souls are truly meant to encounter one another, the relationship touches something ancient inside the psyche. It is not based only on compatibility or chemistry, but on archetypes that already exist within the collective unconscious. Concepts like the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine energies carried within every person, begin to activate through the bond. That is why certain relationships feel instantly significant. The connection reaches beyond the ego and speaks directly to the self, the deepest center of who we are. In the presence of the right person, we often feel strangely exposed and understood at the same time, as if the soul itself has been recognized. This kind of love can feel overwhelming because it awakens projection. We begin to see in the other person not only what they truly are, but also the hidden pieces of ourselves we have not yet integrated. At first, this creates enchantment. The other person appears almost magical, carrying the qualities we long for most deeply. Yet over time, the illusion begins to crack. The relationship stops being only about fantasy and starts revealing truth. This is where real transformation begins. The deeper the connection becomes, the more the shadow emerges. In Jungian psychology, the shadow represents the rejected or unconscious parts of ourselves, the fears, wounds, insecurities, anger, shame, and unresolved pain we try to hide. A destined soul connection does not merely comfort us, it confronts us. The other person becomes a mirror, reflecting both our light and our darkness. This is why such relationships often feel intense and emotionally challenging. They awaken old fears of abandonment, rejection, vulnerability, and loss. But these painful emotions are not signs that the connection is false. In many cases, they are signs that something profoundly real is taking place. True soul connections are not designed only for pleasure or escape. They exist to transform us. They force us to see ourselves more honestly. They ask us to confront wounds we may have carried for years without fully understanding them. Through the relationship, hidden parts of the psyche rise to the surface, demanding awareness and healing. The love itself becomes part of the individuation process, the journey Jung described as becoming who we truly are beneath the masks created by fear and conditioning. That is why these relationships often trigger periods of separation, silence, or emotional distance. From the outside, such moments may appear like endings, but symbolically, they are often stages of growth. Jung believed the unconscious works through cycles. Separation can become a sacred space where both individuals are forced inward. Without constant contact, illusions begin to dissolve. Dependency is challenged. Old patterns surface. The soul learns how to stand alone before it can return to union in a healthier and more conscious way. Many people misunderstand this stage and assume that distance means the love was never real. But in symbolic relationships, time apart can deepen the bond rather than erase it. The connection continues living beneath the surface because it exists on a psychological and spiritual level, not only a physical one. Even when two people are separated, something remains active within the unconscious. Memories return unexpectedly, dreams become vivid, synchronicities appear, the feeling of recognition refuses to disappear completely. This is why some people remain emotionally unforgettable no matter how much time passes. Still, Jung warned against idealizing eternal love without awareness. Archetypes are powerful, but they can also overwhelm the ego if we lose touch with reality. A destined soul is not a perfect fantasy figure sent to complete us. They are a human being carrying both beauty and flaws. The purpose of the relationship is not to create permanent emotional intoxication, but to lead both people toward greater consciousness. Real love begins when projection fades and we learn to embrace the humanity of the other person rather than the fantasy we created around them. This is where mature love is born. It is no longer based on possession, dependency, or illusion. Instead, it becomes a conscious choice to grow together while remaining connected to one's own inner truth. A relationship like this teaches emotional responsibility. Instead of blaming the other for every painful feeling, we begin asking deeper questions. Why does this fear affect me so strongly? What old wound is being activated here? What part of myself still needs healing? Through these questions, love becomes a path towards self-knowledge. The archetype of eternal love appears throughout human history because the soul longs for wholeness. From ancient myths to modern stories, humanity keeps returning to the idea that some connections transcend ordinary explanation. Jung believed these myths persist because they reflect real psychological experiences. When two people feel drawn together beyond logic, they are participating in something symbolic and ancient. The relationship becomes a living myth, not because it is perfect, but because it touches universal patterns buried within the collective unconscious. And perhaps that is why certain bonds never fully disappear. They transform, mature, dissolve illusions, survive silence, and sometimes return in unexpected ways. What connects destined souls is not constant physical closeness, but deep recognition. Once the soul has truly recognized another soul, that experience leaves a permanent imprint. Even if life creates distance, the inner transformation remains. In the end, the greatest lesson of these connections is not simply about romance, it is about awakening. It is about becoming more whole, more conscious, and more honest with ourselves. Some relationships arrive only to comfort us for a season. Others arrive to alter the direction of our lives completely. They reveal hidden parts of our psyche, challenge the ego, and guide us toward deeper self-understanding. Whether the two souls ultimately remain together or not, neither person ever returns to who they were before the encounter. True love, then, is not merely the absence of pain or the promise of endless happiness. It is the courage to face transformation. It is the willingness to let another person mirror the deepest parts of our soul. And perhaps the truest love of all is the one that continues calling us back to ourselves again and again until we finally recognize the sacred within the other and within our own being. In the end, the meeting of two destined souls is never just about romance. It is about awakening, transformation, and the journey back to the deepest truth within ourselves. Through love, separation, longing, and reunion, we are forced to confront both our light and our shadow. According to Carl Jung, these powerful connections are not accidents. They are part of the soul's path toward wholeness, guiding us to heal old wounds, dissolve illusions, and discover who we truly are beneath fear and ego. A destined soul does not enter our lives simply to make us feel loved. They arrive to change us, to mirror us, and to awaken parts of ourselves we may never have discovered alone. Even when distance, silence, or pain appear, the bond continues to live within the unconscious because real soul recognition cannot simply be erased by time. It transforms, matures, and deepens. And perhaps that is the true meaning of eternal love, not perfection, not constant closeness, but a connection that keeps leading both souls back toward truth, growth, and the sacred center of their being. What is truly meant for the soul will always find its way back, because some connections are written far deeper than the surface of life.